who has read anything about blockchain other than something referring to Bitcoin? Okay, how many people really feel like they really understand what blockchain is? Okay, how many people think you can have a blockchain without Bitcoin? Okay, that's a good start. That's a good start. Okay, so we're going to do a couple of things. I'm going to do the obligatory single slide on Paycase, explain Paycase. Then we're going to spend the whole time on a little education journey. So we'll talk a little bit about the background to blockchain and what different types of blockchains are. We're going to do a little exercise. I've done a few versions of this exercise. It's the first time I've done it with arts and crafts, as you can see. And I'm going to need 6 volunteers when we get to it. And the rest of the room is going to have some work to do as well. So you guys all got pens and paper you can scribble on for a reason. So make sure you have it handy, okay? You're going to need it later on. All right, so Paycase, a little on our company. Paycase uses blockchain technologies in its process, but at the heart of what it does, it's a payments remittance technology, and it uses a combination of messaging and settlement combined to send money to second, third world countries at a cost efficiency and in near real time that makes the marketplace available to the 7 million some odd first and second generation Canadian immigrants that send money home every month to their families, to places where $100 makes a real difference. Okay? And we can do it cost effectively at a completely variable cost, so it's a bit of a game changer in the industry. And we do send ultimately from Canadian to destination currencies. We use blockchain technologies in the process. We are not specifically a blockchain company in of itself. All right, so a little bit about the exercise. We're going to talk about blockchain being a social construct. I don't think a lot of people really understand it was an anarchist experiment to start with. Well, so was the internet, and look where we are today. We're going to talk a little bit about the components of it, and we're going to simulate one, of course using balloons, boxes, and very complicated tape, which is absolutely necessary in every blockchain you will see. A social construct, what do I mean by that? Blockchain actually uses some cryptographic technologies that I'm going to go a little bit into the history of because it's kind of interesting actually, but at least in my opinion. But really what it is, it's a game in of itself. So it's a construct of behaviors. We have players in a blockchain and we motivate them to do certain things by setting up the game a certain way. So what are the actual elements of this game? What we're doing with the blockchain is we're creating immutable data. We're storing it in a way, by immutable I mean it's really secured. You cannot change this data without people knowing. And the information is verifiable. Sometimes it's even viewable. Sometimes it's not private information, but it can be privatized and still verifiable, so people know it hasn't been changed. Changes to the system and changes to the information that go into this system have to be by group consensus. In other words, I can't take a blockchain and just change the nature of the game without conferring with the rest of the players. So these are the basic principles. It's a game arranged amongst people with an expected outcome, and you set up the rules of the game so nobody can misbehave themselves, ultimately. And participants can be privatized in a blockchain, or they can be public, or they can be a combination thereof. Okay? And the really fun part is the technologies that are behind all this stuff are actually ancient by our standards. So what do I mean by that? So where does this start? The encryption by cipher and secret codes, 1900 BC. That's where we have evidence of what we do in blockchain back to this point in time. So it's really old. We actually articulated some of the cryptography we use in blockchain was articulated in the 1800s by the Arabs and within European writings by the 1400s. So that type of cryptography, polyalphabetical, alphabetical and alphanumeric, was introduced actually in the 1400s and continued at that level right up to the Enigma machine in World War II. How many people have seen a movie on the Enigma machine? Exactly. So it's pretty old technology. We had a significant change with Hellman and with Diffie in 1975, where they took cryptography and they created what we call pairs, private pairs. So I have a private key, you have a public key. It's a two-token system that allows us to exchange information amongst ourselves and verify it without actually giving somebody your house key. And that was a game changer. We needed standards for that. And when you think about RSA standards and standards you hear about cryptography, this is where it began back in '75. And then we had another step evolution in the '80s with elliptical curve. And then finally, the missing piece that came in and was built into Bitcoin was a little game almost called hash cache. And this is a proof of work concept. So I'm going to talk a little bit more about that later. But as you can see, these elements have been building for a long time. Everyone thinks that technology is an overnight explosion. Wow, all of a sudden we're here. This was just invented yesterday. But generally, it's a very incremental, slow build. And then all of a sudden, it has a tipping point where it hits a usefulness. And that's certainly with the internet. So the modern internet, because I worked on the core of the internet in my career quite a bit with the founders out of DARPA. And they'll tell me again and again and again that they started on those ideas in the '70s. That's how old the internet really is. Okay, and then the other thing that really changed for us that brought us to the point where we have blockchains now, a relevant technology, is CPU. Processing power became cheap. And that was a key component as well, commoditization of computers. All right, types of blockchain. Everyone following me so far? Okay, great. We're going to get to the fun part in a bit. I warned you I was going to bore you for a bit. All right. A few types. Well, Bitcoin is what we call an open ledger system. So remember I said you can put any type of information into a blockchain? Well, Bitcoin is basically an open financial ledger. And it's not even, as we would think of a financial ledger, it has debits and credits, right? We have one side of the ledger in Bitcoin. We just record what people are giving away. It's a one-sided ledger, and we have to figure out the balance by adding up those transactions. And even more interestingly, we have contracts, the idea of concept of contracts going into blockchain. Now, I'm not going to get too much into that because Matt spoke here. Matt, put your arm up. Is going to talk to you about Ethereum and some of the elements in it. But it is a type of blockchain that I think will revolutionize a lot of things we do around contracts and how we share identity management information and so forth. And then the other kind of use you can think of for something like blockchain and storing data in it is maybe it's relevant when we talk about things like supply chain or even the Internet of Things. So you've got a lot of data coming in from a lot of different points now. You may have 10 different devices in your house recording data now. Eventually your fridge is going to tell you when you've had food in the fridge for too long. It's still personal information and you're going to want to secure it somehow. And that's where things like blockchain start to become interesting, but again, maybe not relevant because there's a cost of security. And I'm going to talk about that a little bit later. And again, all this information can be publicized or privatized. That's still a choice. Blockchain does not guarantee one way or the other. It depends how you set up the game around the blockchain. I'm going to actually jump ahead to this and then come back and talk a little bit more specifically about Bitcoin. I think one of the things I wanted to get across to people was the difference or the value set to blockchain. So we're going to actually do a blockchain exercise where you actually see the security of blockchain and how it differs. But let's talk for a second about how existing systems work. I worked in financial systems since the early '90s, and I've been working in security around a lot of core infrastructure systems since then. And our primary model for systems is what we call perimeter security. It means that we try and secure the door to the building, right? And the bigger the building gets, or the bigger the system gets, the more people accessing it, the more key partners and players, the tougher it gets. It's like a growing balloon. In fact, maybe you could pull a balloon out. So this is kind of like your bank system, right? And my financial information is in there. So Adam, try and get into that, will you? Seriously? It's just a balloon. Okay, Justin, can you just show them how to do it? Thank you. Okay, so now these two genius hackers have managed to get my personal private information, right? But, you know, I don't know. You can get my personal private information, but what's more interesting is if Adam here decides to cover his tracks and actually not leave the balloon broken. So what would you do, Adam?
Give you a little bonus first, and then I'm going to wrap it up, cover my tracks, and put it back so it's undetectable.
Right, so he's added 10 grand to my balance. And let's see if he can put it back in the balloon. Meanwhile, we go on. So we beg the question, right? What's different about blockchain in this regard? Because that's the model that we have today. And it doesn't take very much for people to get into some types of systems. It's a very difficult game. So I'm going to take a second and talk about blockchain. And as we go through our blockchain, Bitcoin specifically, as we go through our blockchain exercise, the security elements are become a little bit more obvious and how they differ from that balloon. So, seriously, you're going to put it back in the balloon, are you? Okay. Okay.
You don't want it?
No, keep going. If that makes you happy. All right. So Bitcoin has its own structure that incites participants. It is an open ledger. And the way it works basically is it's got a few players in it. Okay, it's got people, users, that want to post transactions. It's got node operators. These are people that are operating computer instances that connect and create this virtual blockchain. Okay, so they're all part of it and they're operating it. And we have miners that actually do the work of verifying the data, these transactions that are being put into the system, and they build what we call the blocks. Okay?
It's not quite as big and pretty as yours.
That's not going to pass. They're going to know you were in there.
Come on.
Okay,
give
all
me a
right.
break here.
Good enough. Thank you. Thanks for the 10 grand, too. So the main purpose of Bitcoin is to move money around the participants. But what it's checking for, or what I'm looking for in this blockchain, is that nobody's double spending money that they've got declared on Bitcoin. Okay? And I have to incentivize miners to do the work. I have to incentivize the participants. How do I do that? Well, Bitcoin, by mining on Bitcoin, I'm actually issuing new Bitcoin. And that's every miner that does a block on Bitcoin, they get a little Bitcoin minted for them. And that's how they're rewarded. They're also allowed to charge transaction fees to the end users that are putting the transactions through, which they really don't right now because they're pretty satisfied with getting newly minted Bitcoin. But over time, they won't get any more newly minted Bitcoin, and their transaction fees will go up. Okay, follow that so far? I'm going to actually repeat that with a diagram to make it easier to understand in a second. Okay, so let's go to the diagram. So I have an end user. They're putting transactions in through these node operators, and that could be something like you've seen what we call exchanges, Bitcoin exchanges, right? They're going to post my transaction up to go into a block, and a miner here is going to see it and say, oh, I'd like to make some Bitcoin and build the block. Okay? So it's pretty straightforward in that regard. But if I make a lot of money mining, why wouldn't everybody mine, right? So the miner actually has to compete for the privilege of creating the block. And they do that by racing to solve a puzzle every 10 minutes. They do a new block. And so they're racing to solve this puzzle, cryptographic puzzle, and that's where that thing called hash cache comes in. So it is a expandable puzzle. So we want to keep the interval every 10 minutes. So as they get better at solving the puzzle and the computing power gets more powerful, the puzzle gets harder. So it keeps it around 10 minutes for a miner to complete a block. Okay, and so that's the basis to Bitcoin and how we keep everybody behaving in it. Everybody is observing what's happening in the blocks laterally to each other. And so it's a little bit of a safety by observation when we build the blocks. And then we link them. So we're going to get a sense of how we link them. We link them using that cryptography. We wrap everything in cryptography that's very, very difficult to break, mathematically almost impossible. So once I put information in a block, I know it's almost mathematically impossible to change it. And I segment that information. So I only have 250 transactions here, 250 transactions in the next block, and so forth. There are different types of blockchains that don't use the incentive that I just described. The problem with these miners doing this competitive approach is they burn a lot of electricity in doing this. There are incredible warehouses in China where people have specialized computers that are just trying to solve that problem faster than the next person. So it's not efficient. So another way we actually do a chain is we can do it by pure consensus. So let's say I have a private blockchain with a couple hundred banks participating, and they're voluntarily doing the work. So they could share the mining work amongst each other, right? Or they could assign it to a provider if they wanted to as well. So maybe 51% of them see the same transaction going into the block. They all agree that's what's going into the block. And so they're happy to move on. We're going to do that right now. Okay, so I talked a little bit about consensus versus incentive. So on a public blockchain, I have to incentivize people. On private blockchains, we can do the work cooperatively, and we can decide to do that. So in our little exercise here, we're going to verify the transactions amongst ourselves. And if all of us agree that that's what's going in the box, then we're going to seal the box with our cryptographic tape, since we're not actually going to do cryptography here. Does that make sense to everyone? Can I get 6 volunteers? Yeah, I'm going to pick people. Okay, 1. Amy. Jesse. Come on, Matt. Okay, I need 1 more, I think. That's 5. Okay. Can I pick on you, please? Thanks. All right. So you guys go stand behind your any of the boxes, please. Okay. So what we're going to do here is we're going to build 6 blocks. And we're going to do a financial-based blockchain where you don't have time to put contracts in them or bigger loads of information. Okay? And what you guys are going to do is on block 1, our guys here, Adam and Justin. I don't think I introduced Adam and Justin. I am sorry. Everyone, Adam and Justin back there. All right. They're my really heavy-duty hacker crew that I usually bring my lawyer, but today I thought bring millennials would be more fun. Anyways, they're going to be the end users presenting transactions to our node operators. And our node operators are also going to be our miners in this scheme because we don't want to make it competitive. The way they're going to verify the transactions and mine is they're going to get 2 copies of a set of transactions. They're going to show the transactions to the rest of them, so everyone saw it. And 1 copy is going to go in the box after it's marked with their cryptographic tape on both copies. Okay, and then they're going to bind their box close. So if you open your box, you're going to find tape in there. They're all unique. Yep. Okay, so everyone agrees that that's what's there. Now the rest of you, this is where you get your pens and paper out, because this is what's on sheet 1. I want you guys to keep track of what the balance is, because if we don't, one of these transactions is planned to fail in the block for a reason. And there's a reason why everybody's watching the transactions in case someone tries to sneak a fast one in. So I'm trusting all of you to keep track of what the balance actually is per person here. Okay, so we open up. I've given you guys a starting balance on this chain with 3 players. So as we go to each block, I want you guys to keep track of that balance and try and calculate the new balance. Okay, have we put the sheet in the first box? Yep.
Done.
Okay, great. Now seal the box
Done.
with the tape. There we go. Great. Okay, so we're going to do block 2 now.
We're good. Ready to put it in the box. Shall we put this one, sir?
No, just 1 copy and you keep your own copy because this is public information. We're going to share the information. So mark your copy with your tape. This gives everyone here time to work out the balance. All right, seal the box. Wait a second. It's a chain. Take the first tape and mark the second box with the first tape. Because with cryptography, we link. And if your tape is your cryptography, your next box has to contain the cryptography from the first box.
You need nodes with fingernails.
There we go. So now do you guys see how that's linked? That is a real-world kind of approximation of how it works when we actually link blocks. We bind the cryptography. Okay, so now we're going to the next one.
Are we supposed to be keeping track of the balance?
No, that's their job.
Oh.
Now, normally, it would be your job, but I think you guys have enough to do with all that tape, personally.
So are we linking this with the second tape?
Just between each box. So link block 2 to block 3. Yeah, with block 2 tape. There you go. Nice. All right. 4. Oh, do you want a little bit more time for 3? Okay, I'll give you 30 seconds. Do, 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 do. We're all old enough for that, right? Except for you guys over there. You don't get my references at all. Okay, we're going now. We're going. Okay. It's tricky, right? Keeping track of the balance. And can you imagine the number of transactions going through and keeping track of all this? Take your time, Amy. Apparently they need a while to figure out the balance. Yeah. I'm just mocking all of you. I'm just a little bit. A copy of these transactions.
Oh, a copy of the transaction.
Right. So if you think about cryptography, what we're doing here, right, is just an approximation for it. But the concept is now we're putting this information in blocks, right? If I want to go back and modify the information in block 2, I've got to work my way back through all those blocks and change them because they're linked to one another. So the more blocks I put in front of the previous block, the more difficult I make it. And in fact, it's almost mathematically impossible for the first block alone. There's a very tiny window and a lot of observers. So if someone tries to sneak something in, the whole network sees it. This is why it's a lot better than perimeter security for the sake of security. Okay, we're ready for 5? We're going to 5. And we're almost at the eureka moment. I did the totally uninspired thing and I put the failed transaction at the end. Just because I wanted to see you guys tape a lot of boxes together. I'm going to admit I'm kind of enjoying this just a little bit. But I made your life easier because I only gave you 2 transactions on this one. Okay, are you guys ready for 6? Okay. Now, why can't we do this? Bingo. All right. So this is a failed transaction, no block. Woo!
And so does the different colored tape represent
The cryptography.
My personal key?
Yeah, that's a good way to put it.
Why it matters that it's different?
So the way, if we want to break it down, when you post your individual transactions within a block, there's personal keys involved or private keys involved with the transaction that would belong to you. So think of it like a key to your safety deposit box, if you will. Okay? And then there's further encryption, cryptography that's used around the entire block. All right? And we wrap, it's quite, I don't want to get into the math of it, but it's quite complicated. So there's cryptography around the individual transactions, so I can identify that that's my transaction in the box. Now, the problem with that is there's a private key tied to that transaction. If I lose that private key, I lose my money. So when you guys have heard about things like Bitcoin being hacked, the blockchain wasn't hacked at all. It's just somebody who's sloppy, like good old Michael puts $100 in Bitcoin, but I decide to keep my private key not in my own wallet storage. I decided to do that in a third-party provider. And they are sloppy, right? They get broken into with the perimeter security. They have a balloon around my private key, and someone breaks the balloon and takes the private key and my money's gone, basically. It's not unlike me putting the family jewels in a safety deposit box in my local bank and someone physically breaking into the bank and walking off with the jewels. Okay? It's not the blockchain that's at fault when Bitcoin's been ripped off thus far. So we wrap the transaction around its own private key. And then when we put all those transactions in the box, mathematically speaking, we create a title, which is like that tape, for the box. And it's a cryptographic signature that actually does a hash of all the information in the box. So that means that that signature now is only valid as long as the information in the box doesn't change. So if anyone meddles with the information in that box, now my signature doesn't work anymore. So I can see that it's been compromised. And that's the principle. When I go to the next box and I create its signature, part of its signature is a reference to the signature of the previous box. and that's how we link them. Okay? What do you think, Matt? Did I explain that well enough? All right. Okay, and I think, you know what, guys? That's the results. Did everyone get to the answer correctly? All right. Okay. I want to thank everybody and my volunteers, and that concludes our little game today.